My name is Nora Langley. I'm 69 years old, and I've spent the better part of my life raising horses and children on 1,400 acres of dry Nevada land. I've buried a husband, 3 dogs, and 2 good winters of my youth out on those fields. I don't own much, never needed to, but what I did have, I protected with everything I had. That morning, I was standing in the tack room. The light bulb above buzzed the way it always did when it was about to die. Dust floated in the air like ash, and I remember thinking how quiet it was. No wind, no footsteps, just quiet. Then I heard the door close behind me. Liam was already inside, fiddling with an old saddle strap. June followed, pulled the door shut with both hands, and locked it. She didn't even look at me. I asked what was going on. My voice came out even, like I already knew the answer. June opened her briefcase. She took out a folder, thin, crisp, and cold, and laid it on the bench beside me. "Sign it now," she said. "Old woman, or you'll get worse." I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, looked at my daughter, my firstborn, whose hand I once held during a hospital blackout when she was 4, while the monitors beeped and I whispered nursery rhymes into the dark. That same hand now clenched a leather belt. Liam grabbed my wrist. June stepped closer. The first strike was fast, sharp. It caught the side of my ribs where the skin had thinned over time. The second came angled, lower. No one screamed. No one cursed. It was business, not rage. That made it worse. 3, maybe 4 strikes in total. Enough to leave a message. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the cabinet across the room. The one Everett and I built from reclaimed pine, where we used to keep the good bridles and the spare halters. There was a scratch in the wood, shaped like a crooked letter E. He made it by accident. I never sanded it out. That's where I looked. That's what I held on to. When they were done, they left the folder beside me on the bench. June said I could think about it. Then they left the room. The door stayed open. I didn't move for a long time. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe longer. The bulb stopped buzzing. The silence came back, thick as wet cloth. Eventually, I stood up. My side ached, but I didn't press it. I picked up the folder, held it like it might burn me, then dropped it in the corner. Not dramatic, just out of reach. I walked out of the tack room and crossed the gravel yard barefoot. The house looked smaller that morning, older. The porch boards creaked under my step, the way they always had. The screen door hung a little loose, the way Everett used to complain about. Inside, the air was heavy with time from the roast I never served. I went straight to my room, took off the shirt that now had a dark bloom near the waist. I folded it carefully, placed it on top of the dresser, and opened the small drawer where I kept emergency bills. Inside was a single dollar bill, just one. I didn't know why I hadn't used it. Maybe now I did. I put it in my coat pocket. Then I stepped back outside, past the porch, past the horses, who blinked at me without worry, past the fence Everett had hammered together with his bare hands. And I left, not with a suitcase, not with a scream, just $1, and everything I had ever buried beneath that land. They thought I'd left with nothing, but what I kept hidden crushed everything they built. And they were about to find out. There's a bench on the south end of town. Metal slats, blue paint peeling off, and a cigarette burn near the right armrest. I'd sat there once before, after Everett's funeral. And now, again. Only this time, I wasn't grieving a death. I was grieving something still breathing. The early morning wind scraped at my coat. Nevada spring can be cruel like that, the kind of cold that doesn't apologize for arriving uninvited. I held my left side with one hand. The bruise had bloomed fully now, deep and purple beneath my ribs. My other hand rested on the pocket of my coat, where that $1 sat, wrinkled, slightly torn, but still intact. Across the street, a bakery was just opening. I watched as the owner flipped the sign to open and turned on the orange neon light. There was a smell of yeast rising in the air, and I wondered for a moment how something could rise so gently in a world that hits so hard. A bus passed without stopping. I didn't wave. I wasn't going anywhere. Not really. I just needed a place to sit where the silence wasn't shaped like my daughter's voice. The last time I sat here, Liam was 5. He'd fallen off the swing behind the church and split his lip open. I carried him 2 blocks to the bus stop, pressing a handkerchief to his mouth while he sobbed into my neck. I remember whispering, "I've got you," over and over again, like a spell. Now he uses those same hands to hold my arm still while his sister strikes. I'm not sure when it shifted, when softness turned to leverage, when their "we love you" became "you owe us." Maybe I should have seen it coming. Maybe there were signs. The birthday calls that turned into texts. The way they stopped asking about the land and started asking about the deeds. I'd been giving my whole life. Meals, holidays, support, inheritance. And I thought that if I gave enough, they would stay kind. But kindness, I've learned, is not built on memory. It's built on effort. I watched a small boy chase a soda can down the sidewalk. His mother called after him gently, barefoot and laughing. The boy ran straight into her arms, and she scooped him up without a word. That used to be me. I blinked against the rising sun, pulled my scarf tighter, and looked down at my hands. The veins ran high now. The skin was thinner. But they were still my hands. The same ones that had raised a barn, stitched clothes, pulled thorns from horse hooves, cradled babies. The same hands that now hid bruises, but also the same hands that could still hold a pen and sign, or not. I didn't leave that house with nothing. I left with the one thing no one thought to protect, my will. Not the one in the filing cabinet, the one in my chest. I wasn't sure where I'd sleep that night, but I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't sign. Not yet. Not ever. Not like that. The bakery door chimed as someone walked in, laughter trailing behind. I leaned back on the bench and let the cold settle deeper into my coat. The $1 was still in my pocket. It was enough. It started with dust. That's what I remember most. Not the blueprints or the nails. Just dust. Fine, red, and clinging to every seam of our jeans and every fold of our lungs. It coated the back of Everett's neck like rust-colored chalk. We didn't have much back then. No savings. No real machines. Just one borrowed truck, 2 good shovels, and dreams that wouldn't let us sleep. The land we bought wasn't much to look at. Dry as parchment. No fence lines. No water system. Just open space and sky that stretched out like something waiting to be filled. And we filled it. Slowly. One post at a time. I can still feel the weight of the auger in my palms. Everett held the line steady while I poured concrete by the cupful. We did that in winter, so the wind would set the fence faster. My gloves tore by day 3. I wrapped my hands in dish rags and kept going. We built the house ourselves. Everett was handy with wood. I handled the roofing. We slept on the floor for 6 weeks before the bed frame was stable enough to stop creaking. We didn't complain. Because it was ours. And it was beautiful in the way only hard-won things are. When June was born, we wrapped her in a quilt my mother had sewn from old feed sacks. The corners were rough, but she didn't seem to mind. She was quiet even then, observant, the kind of baby who stared more than she cried. I used to carry her out to the west field while Everett adjusted the irrigation lines. She'd chew on her mittens while I hummed whatever lullaby I half remembered. By the time she was 7, she'd learned how to close the barn gate without slamming it. Everett was proud of that. "Quiet hands make strong barns," he always said. I remember one summer, the pipes burst behind the east plot. The pressure knocked out the entire line, and the water rushed down like floodwater on baked soil. June was 10. It was late, and the thunder was already rolling in. But when she saw me struggling to hold the hoses, she ran out barefoot, soaked her school dress straight through. She grabbed the end of the main line and held it down while I fixed the clamp. Her hair stuck to her face, and her arms shook, but she didn't let go. Afterward, I gave her cocoa with too much sugar and wrapped her feet in a towel. She never mentioned it again. That's the part that cuts deepest now. Not that she turned, but that she once held the pipe steady for me, in the rain. That she once loved the land enough to freeze for it. Now she says things like ROI and marketable acreage, like she never saw the soil stained red with our hands, like she never learned that water doesn't flow unless someone opens the line first. Everett and I never wanted to be rich. We just wanted a place where memory could root deep. And it did. In the nails, the beams, the way the porch light always flickers twice before staying on. I looked down at the road, gravel catching sunlight in specks. What June didn't know is that I still remembered the land before it had her footprints on it, and I still knew how to protect it. The wind picked up again, brushing grit against my coat. Some things start with dust, but they don't end there. Snowy died in late October. The air had turned, but the ground hadn't frozen yet. A mercy, Everett called it. She was Liam's first real horse, not a show pony, not a lesson mare, just a white Appaloosa with one eye slightly clouded and a gait that favored the left. She was stubborn and beautiful, and patient in a way only old souls are. We buried her behind the hayshed, under the cottonwood that still leans southeast like it's listening to something we can't hear. Liam cried. He was 14, trying hard not to. He stood with his fists tucked into his jacket pockets, biting the inside of his cheek the way Everett used to when holding back words. June stood nearby, silent. She didn't cry, but her hands wouldn't stop moving. She kept folding and unfolding the same edge of her coat over and over. I brought out the wooden box Everett had made from scrap cedar. Inside it, I laid a few things. Snowy's old feed tag, a braid of her mane tied with blue yarn, and the red flannel scarf Liam used to wrap around her neck every winter. It was more symbolic than practical, but Snowy never shook it off, as if she knew what it meant to be dressed with care. Liam placed the box into the shallow grave. His hands trembled. Then Everett stepped forward, knelt beside it, and pressed one palm to the dirt. He whispered something I couldn't hear, and then we covered her, shovel by shovel, wordless, not because there wasn't grief, but because there was too much of it. That night, we ate stew in the barn office. No one said much. But when Liam leaned his head against my shoulder, I let it stay there until he fell asleep sitting up. That was the boy who once asked me if horses understood love. I told him yes. Now he tells me horses are liabilities and fencing is a drain on equity. June once spent an entire weekend drawing maps of our pasture. Crayon-colored zones, marked for planting, riding, and wildflower picnics. Last week, she handed me a printed spreadsheet labeled Phase 2 Expansion, Ridge to Southline Same Land. Same girl. Different eyes. I sometimes wonder if places remember the people who change inside them. If the barn notices when the hands that used to oil leather now scroll contracts. If the porch creaks different under feet that no longer belong. I stood at Snowy's grave last spring. The cottonwood had dropped its leaves early. They crunched beneath my boots, brittle and loud. I saw the edges of the box peeking out, just a corner, where the earth had shifted slightly. The red flannel scarf was still intact, faded but unmistakable. I knelt, brushed the dirt off gently, and pressed it to my chest. Not because I missed the horse, but because I missed the boy who once tied it. They used to love this place. Not the acreage, not the market value. The place. The smell of hay after rain. The sound of coyotes howling beyond the east fence. The porch light flickering twice before it stayed on. Maybe that's what broke first. Not their hearts, but their memory. It had been 7 months since the belt, since I'd walked out of that tack room, bruised and quiet, with $1 in my coat pocket. The morning they came back, the porch steps creaked like they were holding their breath. Liam knocked first, 2 short, 1 long, just like when he was a boy, too polite to barge in. I didn't answer right away. From the kitchen window, I could see their shadows, stiff outlines behind the stained glass. They weren't speaking, just standing there. Then June said softly, "Mama, we're here to help." Her voice, gentle, measured, like tea being poured into an empty cup. I opened the door slowly. They stood there in city jackets. No dust, no smell of hay. June's nails were manicured, pale pink like she used to paint them in high school. Liam wore a branded fleece vest. Not ranch branded, tech company branded. I didn't speak, just moved aside. They walked in like strangers do, too careful, too polite, their eyes darting across the furniture like they were checking for evidence of something. The house hadn't changed. Not really. Still the same lace curtains. Still Everett's photo above the hearth. Still the small wooden bowl by the door for keys and pocket knives. June reached out, let her hand hover above a sun-faded chair cushion, then pulled it back. "We thought maybe you need help with the property," Liam said. I turned. His eyes didn't meet mine. He was scanning the living room, measuring with glances. "I've been managing," I replied. June smiled, small, tight. "Of course you have. You always do." She said it like a compliment, but there was something under it, like a nail buried beneath a rug. They sat, on opposite sides of the couch, not like before. Liam cleared his throat. "You know, Mom, land management is changing. A lot of folks around here are consolidating. Makes it easier long term. Less burden on people your age." There it was. Soft voices, hard intention. I stared at the kettle on the stove. It hadn't whistled in days. Not since I stopped making tea at 4 p.m. sharp. Not since I realized no one was showing up anymore to drink it with me. "I'm not selling," I said. "No one said sell," June answered quickly. "We're just thinking ahead. You could live here comfortably. We take care of the logistics." Liam added, "We'd keep the legacy intact." Legacy. That's the word they always use when they mean leverage. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and said nothing. June shifted, smoothed her skirt. "You're still doing payroll by hand?" she asked, eyeing the envelope on the table. "Yes. I could help digitize that for you." "No, thank you." She paused. "Mama, we're not your enemies." I didn't reply, because once, just once, someone who's not your enemy says, "Sign it now, old woman." And after that, silence feels safer than clarity. The briefcase sat on my table like a wound that hadn't been bandaged. Black leather, polished, expensive. Not the kind of thing that belonged in my kitchen. It was June's. She unclipped the latches slowly, like a pianist preparing to play a funeral hymn. "I brought some papers," she said gently. I watched her fingertips, still pink polished, still sure, pull out a neat folder marked Langley Energy Transition Proposal. Liam shifted in his seat. He looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was the way he avoided touching anything too familiar. "This is good for everyone, Mama," June continued. "The state wants clean energy. There's a firm offering above market for rural acreage near transmission lines." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my land?" "Our land," she corrected, voice still soft. I didn't answer, just watched as she spread out diagrams, flowcharts, projected earnings. Liam leaned forward, pointing to a green-shaded area. "They're calling this zone prime capture real estate. High return in the first 5 years. We'd retain naming rights to the trust. Langley Solar. Has a ring to it, doesn't it?" It rang like a doorbell I wasn't going to open. My tea kettle began to hiss. I stood, walked over, and turned off the flame. The silence that followed felt longer than it probably was. "Have you read this?" I asked, nodding at the pages. "I prepared it," June replied, a little too proudly. "I meant Liam." He hesitated. "The highlights." I returned to the table, still standing. Let my eyes scan the document. No mention of soil loss. No clause for water preservation. No protection for the grazing routes or the ridge paths Everett and I carved out by hand. Just yield charts, tax structures, and signatures. Mine, blank. "You'd be secured for life," June said. "We've already negotiated a family equity split. The 3 of us." The 3 of us. Funny how they only use that phrase when they want something. I looked at the space between them, how they angled their chairs in slightly, a united front, and me, on the other side of the table, like a client at a closing. "Do you remember what was here before the table?" I asked suddenly. June blinked. "What?" "This spot, this exact spot. Do you remember?" She furrowed her brow, shook her head. "Liam?" I asked. He looked up. I don't think so." "It was the playpen," I said. "When y'all were little. Right here, on this patch of floor." Neither spoke. "I'd knead dough while you napped. I could see both of you from the stove. June used to hum before she fell asleep. Liam would chew on the railings. I had to tape socks around the edges so he wouldn't chip a tooth." They still said nothing. I sat down slowly, folded my hands, and said calmly, "I'm not signing." June's mouth tightened. Not a frown, just a recalibration. Liam looked down. The chart he'd pointed to curled at the edge. June began to gather the papers without a word. But before she closed the folder, I saw her slip something else in. A second document, labeled Contingency Pathway, Power of Attorney Transfer. My hands were steady, but inside, something cracked, not from surprise, but from clarity. They hadn't come to help. They came to collect. And the thing about collection is, it only works if the person owing forgets what's truly theirs. I birthed 2 children. But I didn't birth this greed. Liam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That was the thing about gaslighting. It never came with shouting, just spreadsheets, ROI charts, market trends that talked louder than your own memories. He laid out another page, earnings projection from the solar company. Look, Mom, this isn't emotional. It's math, he said, tapping the numbers. These parcels aren't legacy anymore. They're capital. You can't sit on 1,400 acres in 2025 like it's 1955. I stared at the line marked, Net Asset Liquidation Recommendation. Liquidation. Like this land was a collection of antique spoons, not generations of calloused hands and buried pets and orchard roots older than any of us. June leaned forward. We're not trying to push you. We're trying to honor you. Honor me by selling what I've kept whole? I asked, voice low. By letting go, she said. So you can finally rest, enjoy your years. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. June reached for my hand. It was the same gesture she used as a girl, when her knees were scraped or her fears too big to name. But now it was manicured fingers with a contract folded beneath the palm. You deserve to breathe, Mama, she said. We'll take care of everything. And there it was. The illusion of kindness dressed in concern. Liam added, We're not villains here. We're being practical, responsible. You're still on the deed. It's your call. But when I looked up, the words didn't match their eyes. Their eyes were waiting, not asking. And I realized I wasn't being offered a choice. I was being managed. Gently, strategically, like someone too old to fight but too stubborn to fold. You talk like this is a mercy, I said slowly, but it sounds like a maneuver. Liam bristled. That's not fair. June echoed, It's not an attack. Then why does it feel like I'm losing without being told I'm in a battle? Silence. Not the respectful kind. The calculated kind. Liam shifted in his chair, pulled out a final folder. We can do this now, or revisit next month. But either way, there's movement. The investors need clarity. Investors. I nodded. And for a moment, just to them, I said nothing. But to myself, I said everything. This isn't personal, Mom. We just want you to rest. This is good for the family. You're being emotional. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. I had heard every one of those lines before. From Everett in his final year, when I begged him to write the land into a trust. From the mortgage broker who swore the second signature was just a formality. From the nurse who called me dear as I explained my husband's medication history, twice. From my pastor when I said I needed time away from Sunday dinners. And now, from my own children, the children I once protected from thunder, who now spoke with umbrellas already open. Let me be clear, I said quietly. I'm not confused. I'm not tired. I'm not nostalgic. I'm not emotional. I am wide awake. Liam stood. June straightened. The warmth in the room evaporated like a kettle pulled off too soon. And in that moment, I knew exactly what came next. I made the roast anyway. Same as always. Rosemary from the garden, garlic rubbed into the skin, carrots lined like fence posts around the meat, potatoes cut the way Everett liked. Even if he's been gone 7 years, his seat at the table still felt occupied somehow. I set 3 plates. I warmed the corn muffins, brought out my mother's blue-patterned china, the good forks, cloth napkins folded in triangles. Because despite everything, I was still their mother. Liam sat first, then June, both with their backs straighter than usual, Like dinner was a performance, and I was the audience they had to impress by doing nothing at all. I served them gently, placed each plate in front of them, said softly, "Dinner's ready." And then, nothing. They didn't lift their forks, didn't unfold their napkins, didn't look at me, didn't even say grace. The roast steamed in silence. I sat down across from them, waited. June finally reached for her water glass, took a small sip, set it down. Still no words, still no movement toward the food. I looked at Liam. His eyes were fixed on the far window, watching something that wasn't there. I tried. "It's your favorite, Liam." Shoulder cut. Took hours. He didn't flinch, not even a blink. I tried again. "June, I used thyme instead of sage in the carrots, like you asked last Thanksgiving." She inhaled, slowly, then exhaled. Still nothing. I looked at their plates, steam fading. Then I noticed it. A small detail, but loud. Their forks, upside down, laid backward across the napkins, like they weren't staying, like they never meant to. I cleared my throat. "Well, if you're not hungry, I can pack it." June spoke first, but not like June. Not my daughter. Not the girl who once cried because I cut her sandwich in rectangles instead of triangles. This voice was sharp, measured, hollow. "We've already eaten." I blinked. "You didn't say—" "We didn't come to eat, Mother." Mother. Not Mama, not Mom, not even Nora. Mother. Liam finally spoke. His voice was low, tight. "We didn't come to talk anymore either." He looked at me then, for the first time that day, and I saw it. Not anger, not regret, just vacancy. Something gone. "You need to sign," he said, and then stood. June stood too. I stood last. Not out of weakness, but to feel my own feet under me. "I won't sign," I said calmly. June stepped around the table. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I moved toward the counter, reached for the dishcloth. Liam's voice behind me. "Don't walk away again." I turned, looked straight at them both, said nothing. Because I knew. After this night, they wouldn't call me Mama again. Not even once. "Could you check the water heater in the tack room, Mama?" That's how Liam said it. So casual, so light, the way you'd ask someone to grab the mail. The roast still sat untouched on the table, the blue china cold now. My hands smelled of garlic and thyme. I nodded slowly, slid my coat on, didn't even question. Because when your children say Mama, you still go, even when you know something's off. I stepped outside. The air was sharp, but my boots knew the path. I walked past the barn, past the oak tree Everett planted the year Liam was born. The tack room stood just ahead, small, weathered, still holding that faint scent of hay and saddle oil. I opened the door, dark inside, but I stepped in. Before I could turn, click. The door slammed shut behind me. Locked. Silence. Then footsteps. Then June's voice, cold, practiced. "You left us no choice." The light overhead flickered on. Liam stood in front of me, holding Everett's old leather belt. I blinked. Not in disbelief, in confirmation. He said, "Just sign it, old woman. Do it now, or you'll get worse." Old woman. That's what he called me. Not Mom, not Mama, not even Nora. Just old woman. I didn't say a word. Didn't flinch. So he stepped closer, raised the belt. I closed my eyes. First strike. A snap across the back of my coat. It didn't break skin, but it broke something inside me I didn't know could still crack. Second strike. Lower, across the ribs. I clenched my teeth, bit the inside of my cheek. Didn't scream. Third, not on my body, but on my name. "You never loved us enough to give us what we're owed," he shouted. That's when it hurt the most. Not the belt, not the impact, but the belief in his voice, that I owed him, that what Everett and I built, what I kept breathing into every harvest, every debt paid, every broken fence fixed, was his by entitlement, not gratitude. I opened my eyes, looked at him. June stood behind him, arms crossed, face pale but hard. I said nothing. Didn't scream, didn't fight. Because this wasn't the kind of war you win with shouting. This was the kind of war where silence was your last piece of armor. I took one step back, reached into my coat pocket, pulled out one single dollar bill, folded it once, then placed it gently on the edge of the hay bench. You want everything? I said quietly. Take this too. Liam stared at the dollar, confused. You can't buy anything with that, he snapped. I met his eyes, and for the first time, I smiled. Not in mockery, but in clarity. Exactly, I said, and you just sold your soul for less. I turned to the door. June moved aside. No resistance, because the thing about power, it only works when the person you're hurting believes they're weak. But I had never been weak, just slow to walk away. I stepped into the night air, coat torn, back stinging, cheek damp with blood from my own teeth. But I walked, without looking back, without permission, and without a word. I don't remember how I got back to the house. My feet walked, but my mind was still locked in that tack room, echoing with the sting of leather and the sound of my own silence. The cold barely registered. My coat clung to me, damp with sweat, or maybe tears. I honestly couldn't tell. There was a raw ache in my chest, not from the belt, but from the way Liam's eyes had looked through me. Like I was nothing, like I never meant anything. The porch light was still on, casting a tired yellow glow. I stepped inside. I didn't turn on the lamps. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't head to the bathroom or check for bruises. I just walked straight to Everett's chair. It's where he always sat after supper. That spot in the living room that still smelled faintly of pine cleaner and his aftershave. The fabric had faded from sun and use, and the armrests were worn down in places his hands used to rest. I sat, not because I was tired, but because something in me needed to anchor. The house was quiet, too quiet. No ticking clock, no creak of floorboards, just me, and the ghost of everything I'd once built. I reached down beside the chair, just like Everett used to. There, tucked beneath the edge of the quilt basket, was the old shotgun. It hadn't been touched in years, still dusty, still whole. I didn't pick it up, I didn't load it, I just pulled it closer, gently, so it rested beside my boot. Not for protection, just for memory. To remind myself that I still had choices. I looked across the room. The table was still set from dinner. The roast had gone cold. The candles had burned low. The napkins were still folded neatly. No one had eaten. No one had even touched their plates. They just left it all there, like I didn't exist. I thought about clearing it, but I didn't move. I just stared into the dark and remembered. I remembered rocking Liam when he had ear infections and crying outside the hospital door when June had her tonsils out. I remembered birthday cakes from scratch and Halloween costumes sewn at the last minute. I remembered prom nights and graduation caps, late-night drives to pick them up from parties, whispered secrets, and soft apologies after arguments. I remembered motherhood in color. And tonight, it had all gone black and white. They didn't just hit me. They erased me, not with a belt, but with their eyes, their silence, their absence of mom. That word used to live in this house, It used to echo from every corner, laughing, crying, demanding, loving. Tonight, it died. I didn't cry. My eyes were dry like the land in August. I didn't scream. There was no one left to hear it. And I didn't call the police. Because what would I even say? My children assaulted me because I wouldn't give them everything I own. Number. There was no room for humiliation on top of betrayal. But I didn't lock the door. That's what I remember most. I didn't lock the door that night. A part of me, some tiny, fragile, pitiful part, still hoped they might return. Knock softly. Say, "Mama, I'm sorry." Hand me a cup of tea and pretend none of this had happened. But the bigger part of me, the woman who'd buried a husband and tilled 1,400 acres of soil and stood in storms alone, that part knew better. They weren't coming back. Not as my children. Not as anything I could still recognize. And so I sat, in Everett's chair, the gun resting nearby, like a warning I never intended to give. And I said something, only to myself, not out loud, just quietly, in my head. You don't have to explain anymore. You don't owe anyone your life's work, not even your children. The house stayed quiet. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like truth, and it would have to be enough for now. The next morning, I left the house without folding the blanket on Everett's chair. I left the roast on the table, the plates untouched, the door unlocked. I didn't pack a suitcase, just took my handbag, a folded photo of the ranch from 20 years ago, and the $1 bill still resting in my coat pocket. The bruise on my back throbbed with each step, but I didn't wince. Pain had a funny way of clarifying direction. I drove east, past the old church where Everett and I once renewed our vows, past the hay barn we'd lost in the wildfire back in '94, and finally, up the gravel road where Ellen lived, my sister, 2 years older, less words, more steel. I hadn't seen her in nearly 8 months, not since Everett's memorial. I parked beneath her oak tree. It was still shedding late leaves despite the spring. I stood at her door for a moment, unsure what I even looked like, what I had become overnight. Then I knocked. She opened the door after 3 beats, didn't gasp, didn't say, "My God, Nora, what happened?" She just stepped aside and said, "Put the kettle on, would you?" Inside her house, nothing had changed. Woven blankets, shelves of books she actually read, a single photograph of her late wife, Diana, above the fireplace, and on the windowsill, a small cactus I had given her 12 birthdays ago, still alive. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle. The sink still squeaked on the left handle. I watched the water rise and didn't say a word. She brought out the good china, the kind Mama used to save for Easter Sunday. I sat down across from her at the breakfast table. Sunlight poured through the blinds and hit the white rim of her cup like it had something to say. She looked at me, eyes steady, not pitying. Her hand reached across the table, not to touch mine, but to slide a tea bag toward me. "Chamomile," she said. "You still like that?" I nodded. We steeped in silence. 2 women, 2 sisters. One bruised in body, one bruised enough by life to recognize what had happened without needing a word. Finally, I said it. Not all of it, just the shape of it. They asked me to sign over the land. She didn't blink. And you didn't. No. Then you did right. Another silence. I looked down into my tea. The steam rising was the only thing moving in the room. Her voice came softer this time, like it was walking carefully toward me. "You still breathing?" I gave her a look, a half smile. Obviously. She took a sip from her cup, swallowed slowly, and said something that went straight through my chest and landed deep. Then there's still a road. That was all. Not a lecture. Not a list of what I should do next. Not a plan. Just that. You're breathing. Then there's still a road. I let that sentence sit there with me. Felt it settle like a blanket warmed on a line. It didn't solve anything. But it reminded me there were still choices that belonged only to me. She stood, went to the pantry, and brought back a small tin. Inside, her old check register, a stack of sticky notes, and 3 envelopes. "You'll stay as long as you need," she said, not looking at me. "But I figure by next week, you'll be too restless." I raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" "Because I know you're kind of quiet," she said. "You're not running away. You're winding up." I didn't answer, but in that moment, I think I smiled for the first time in days. She poured more tea, then walked to the screen door and pushed it open. The breeze came in. It smelled like earth, and something else I hadn't felt in a long while. Possibility. 2 days later, I sat in the corner booth of Watson's Cafe, cradling a lukewarm cup of coffee. The kind that tastes like tin and burned time. I wasn't there for the coffee. I was waiting for Margaret Becker. We hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years. Not since her brother's funeral. But I remembered something she once said to me in line at the post office. Back when Everett was still alive and I still believed family meant protection. She'd said, "If you ever get cornered by blood, Nora, call me. I know how to guard a boundary." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I did. The door jingled. Margaret entered in a raincoat 2 sizes too big, hair tucked under a cap, glasses smudged. She looked exactly the way I needed her to, not surprised to see me, not overly warm, not pitying, just present. She sat across from me, reached into her coat, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Don't need to tell me the whole thing," she said, opening the pad. I saw the bruises. I blinked. "From where?" She gave a half smile. "Ellen called. She didn't give details, just said you were finally ready." That word. Finally. Margaret had worked in the county land office for over 2 decades before retiring, but she never stopped reading deeds like they were poetry or battle plans. She took a pen from her purse. "You still have full title to the property?" I nodded. "Yes. Everett signed everything to me after the cancer diagnosis. Said he wanted to keep it simple." Margaret nodded. "Smart man." She began drawing lines, boxes for parcels, arrows for water access, little notes for tax codes. I watched her hand move like someone mapping out a future. Then she paused. "There's a way," she said softly, "to keep the land intact and keep it out of their reach." My breath caught. "Even if they contest it?" "They can contest anything," she said. "But you can place the land in a conservation trust, designate a steward, lay out inheritance contingencies tied to moral behavior clauses. It'll take a lawyer, a notary, and about 3 weeks." I didn't respond immediately, just stared at her. This woman who once lost everything to her own son's gambling debts, who had to auction her childhood home just to avoid jail time from unpaid property taxes. Margaret had learned the hard way. Now she was offering me a map through my own fire. She leaned in. "You have to move fast, not out of fear, out of clarity. They hurt you. That's done. But if you want this land to be more than a tombstone to your silence, then this is the time." I looked down at her notes. So simple on paper. boxes and arrows, lines and signatures. But behind those, a lifetime. Everett's hands planting pecan trees, June's 5th birthday picnic by the creek, Liam's first scar from falling off the barn roof, my mother's rose bush blooming like clockwork every spring. It wasn't just acreage, it was memory, it was meaning. I don't want revenge, I finally said. Margaret didn't blink. Good, that makes you powerful. She pushed the pad toward me. Here's the lawyer. He's quiet, sharp, owes me a favor. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a small, worn card. Tucked inside, a pressed wildflower. I kept this from your wedding, she said. It fell out of your bouquet. I touched it with the tip of my finger. Why? She shrugged. I always believed you'd need a reminder of who you used to be. We sat in silence. The coffee between us now cold, but something else, beginning to warm. That night, I read every paper she gave me 3 times. And when I went to bed, I slept for the first time without dreams. That Thursday morning, I opened the bottom drawer of Everett's old desk for the first time in nearly 2 years. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just needed to move my hands through something that still felt like him. A drawer full of chaos, loose bolts, old receipts, faded maps, keys I never figured out. Then I found the tape, a cassette, no label, just a piece of masking tape across the front, with his handwriting, in case they forget. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned it over. The edges were worn soft, like something held and reheld 1,000 times. I had to dig up the old player from the attic. Still smelled like cedar dust and mothballs. I plugged it in, sat on the floor, clicked play. For a moment, there was just static. And then, his voice. Low, gravelly, slower than I remembered. But his. If you're hearing this, Nora, I guess I'm gone. I froze. I didn't want to leave you without words. I know you. You'll stay quiet until something snaps. Then you'll disappear into yourself. But this land, Nora, it's not just soil. It's blood. It's story. And you're the keeper of that story now. I pressed my palm to the cassette player, as if touching it could make him real again. They'll come one day, he continued, with papers and smiles, with numbers and dreams that aren't ours. And if they forget who raised them, if they forget what built this house and fed those holidays and kept us from the banks, then you let the land remember. There was a pause. I could hear him swallow. Don't give it away, Nora. Not for guilt, not for quiet, not even for peace. Because what you hold isn't just property, it's proof. Another pause. You were always the one who saw, the long view. I just planted fence posts and cursed the wind. But you knew this land like a hymn. So sing it when they try to silence you. Static again. Then the tape stopped, and I sat there, in the attic dust, with the cassette still spinning silently. I didn't cry. Not that time. Instead, I stood, took the tape, and brought it downstairs. On the mantel, next to Everett's folded flag from his time in the reserves, I placed the cassette. It didn't need a case. It was already a monument. That night, I called Margaret. I'm ready, I said. For the papers? She asked. No, I said. For the reckoning. We set a date, not for confrontation, but for declaration. I wasn't going to strip my children of their names, their rights, their access to air. But I would draw a line so clean, they'd have to look twice before they crossed it again. I looked again at the cassette before turning in. Everett hadn't left me instructions. He'd left me remembrance. And that kind of memory, it roots itself in the bones, the kind you can't erase with ink on contracts or threats in the tack room. He believed I'd hold the line, and I would. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to look in the mirror and say, he was right. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was clean and sharp, the kind of blue that only shows up after a long rain. I had just set the kettle on when I heard tires crunching the gravel. I looked out the kitchen window, Margaret's car, and behind it, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. I didn't flinch, didn't rush to fix my hair or wipe my hands on my apron. I simply opened the front door, left it open, let them come to me. Margaret stepped out first, holding her worn leather briefcase like a shield. Then a man in a charcoal suit followed, neat, polite, with a firm jaw and kind eyes. The kind of lawyer who knows how to draw blood with a smile. They didn't knock, just walked in as I had told them to. "Is this still a good time?" Margaret asked. I nodded once. "It's time." We sat in the parlor. I took my usual place in Everett's chair, and we waited. 10 minutes later, Liam's truck pulled in. June stepped out first, dressed sharp like she always did when she wanted to project control. Liam followed, wearing that same fake grin he used to charm the bank manager 5 years ago. They didn't see the other car until they reached the porch. Then June froze. Liam kept walking. When he entered the house and saw Margaret sitting with the attorney beside her, his smile cracked. June followed slower. "Mom?" she asked, eyes darting. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I just looked at them, steadily, quietly. Margaret stood. "This is Mr. Daly," she said, nodding to the lawyer. "He's here to serve you formal notice on behalf of Ms. Nora Langley." The room tensed. Liam tried to chuckle. "Serve us? For what?" Mr. Daly opened a folder, removed 2 envelopes, and placed them neatly on the table. One addressed to June, the other to Liam. Legal notice. Notice of pending land trust establishment. Restriction of access. Cease and desist for coercive behavior toward a senior citizen. Violation of familial fiduciary ethics, Daly said calmly. Your mother retains all legal ownership. She is within full rights to establish protection trusts against pressure or manipulation. June's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You're suing us? She said. Your own children? Still, I didn't answer. I just folded my hands. Liam laughed, but it was hollow. Come on, Ma, this is a stunt. You're upset. You don't mean this. Margaret's voice was ice. She means every word, and she's within every right. June stepped closer. You don't want to do this, Mom. You'll divide this family forever. I met her eyes, and I whispered, not loud, but with weight. You did that already? The room went silent. Only the ticking of the old wall clock filled the space. Tick, tick, tick. Liam picked up his envelope, stared at it like it might explode. June didn't touch hers. Then, almost in a whisper, she asked, Why didn't you just tell us you didn't want to sell? I tilted my head. You didn't ask. You demanded. I stood, walked over to the window, watched a bird land on the garden fence, same fence Everett once patched during a snowstorm. Behind me, no one moved. Then I said the only thing left to say, You may be my children, but that land is ours. And I left the room, not in anger, not in triumph, just in peace, because the line had been drawn, not in ink, not in courtroom speeches, but in silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest declaration of all. It didn't take long. 3 days after the letter was served, Liam and June came back with cardboard boxes and forced smiles. They said nothing when I opened the door. I said nothing back. They didn't pack like people heartbroken. They packed like people evicted. June walked past the rose bush without a glance. Liam kept his boots on while stepping over Everett's coat rack. It should have hurt more, but honestly, it felt like dust finally being cleared from a room that hadn't breathed in years. They didn't look me in the eye, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't even take the family photos, just electronics, laptops, a coffee machine, and the leather briefcase I once bought Liam when he got his first bank job. June left the back door open. I closed it behind them, twice. That night, I made tea, not out of habit, but out of celebration. The house sounded different, lighter, like it had been holding its breath. I went into the kitchen, ran my hand across the counter, wiped it with lavender oil like my mother used to. Then I opened the drawer near the sink. Inside, wrapped in a pale blue ribbon, was the old cotton kerchief, Snowy's, the one I buried with her favorite stick, the one I thought I'd never want to see again. But that morning, something told me it was time to wash it. I filled the sink with warm water, added a few drops of soap, lowered the cloth in gently, like I was handling a memory too sacred to press. I let it soak, watched the years swirl away in suds. Then I carried it out, cloth dripping, fingers damp, pinned it to the same line where I used to hang Liam's overalls and June's Sunday dresses. The sun was warm, the breeze soft, and as the fabric fluttered, weightless, clean, I whispered something under my breath. Roots don't move. Because I hadn't. Not really. They tried to force me, bend me, cut me out of the land I once built with my bare hands and aching knees. But roots grow under storms. And sometimes, the deepest ones don't bloom flowers. They just hold. I turned back toward the house. My house. The door shut behind me with a soft click. Inside, everything was quiet, except my heartbeat, steady, certain. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest in my own story. The next Saturday, the house wasn't quiet. It was full of little feet, laughter, and the smell of cookies. The children from next door came over, Mrs. Taylor's grandkids. They'd always been polite, but never stayed long before. I suppose the tension in the air had once warned them to keep away. But that morning, they wandered in like sunshine through an open window. There was Sophie, age 7, who always wore her pink rain boots, even when the skies were clear. Ethan, her brother, liked to draw animals with too many legs. And baby Laurel, still learning to walk, held my thumb like it was the most important thing she'd ever touched. They ran around the porch, chased each other across the wildflowers I'd let grow freely this spring, tumbled near the old oak Everett planted on our second anniversary. No one cried. No one broke anything. The land, this land that had seen fists, fury, and fear, was now echoing giggles and bare feet. Sophie stood still at one point, looked at the rolling fields that had once nearly been signed away. Then she turned to me and said, "I like this place. It feels quiet." I smiled. Not the polite smile. Not the "I'm still standing" smile, a full one. The kind that begins somewhere behind your ribs and pushes gently through your cheeks. And I answered, "It's quiet, because it's been kept with love." She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did. Children know more than we give them credit for. Later, when they'd gone home with pockets full of mint leaves and dogwood petals, I sat on the porch swing. The same one Everett built when June was born. The paint had peeled, the ropes had frayed, but it still held. I sipped tea, And I listened. To wind, to wood creaking gently, to birds telling stories I couldn't translate. Then I looked out across the land, the hills, the fencing, the barn, the tack room, and I said aloud, not to anyone, but maybe to the land itself, "You still know my name," because it did. This place remembered my hands, the bruises, the planting, the scraping knees. It remembered Everett's boots. It remembered Snowy's gallop. It remembered a time when two children called it home with love, before they forgot what home meant. But the land hadn't forgotten, and it never asked me to prove my worth. It simply held me, like roots. And that's the quiet truth. You don't have to fight to be seen. You don't have to yell to reclaim what's already yours. You just have to stay. And let love do what it's always done best: outlast the storm.